Welcome students to lesson 18 of the Changing Economic World topic in GCSE Geography. This is the final lesson on our solutions to the development gap, ways to reduce the gap, and we're going to focus on tourism. This may be the lesson and the topic that most of you are most familiar with because you may have gone on holiday before to another country, in which case you might be able to understand some of these ideas more than in previous lessons. Please take a moment to write the date, title and learning objective. Make sure that you have a pen and paper ready to learn. Let's go. Time to review learning. Write 1 to 10. Answer all the questions from memory and then mark your answers. Go. Number 1. The multiplier effect happens when one economic activity indirectly leads to other economic activities. 2. What are tropical storms called in the Indian Ocean? They are called cyclones. 3. The increase of manufacturing in a country is called industrialization. 4. What is the minimum ocean temperature needed for tropical storms to form? 27 degrees. 5. What was the magnitude of the Chile earthquake in 2010? It was 8.8 on the Richter scale. 6. What does GDP per capita not show about a country because it is an average? Inequality. 7. What does NEE stand for? Newly Emerging Economy. 8. What type of country exports mostly primary products? LIC. 9. What was it called when the Belgians took control of the Congo for the natural resources they have there? Colonialism. And number 10, what is it called when a HIC cancels the debt of another country? It is debt relief. Please mark your answers. Give yourselves a mark out of 10. Any that you got wrong, write down the question and the answer. Test yourself on it. Come back to this test in a week and see if you've improved. Everyone loves to go on holiday to another country. Sun, sand, sea, it's the dream. Today we're going to focus on whether tourism can actually help a country to develop. There are some things about tourism that are really attractive and make a country develop, and so there are some things that are holding it back. Let me show you. First, I'm going to show you a photo of a typical tourist scene in Jamaica, this country we're going to study today, and I'm going to show you some questions. Please answer the questions from the best of your own knowledge, and then we will discuss the answers. Here's the photo. Here are the questions. So number 1, describe what you see in the photo. Well, you may have talked about the fact there's a cruise ship in the background. There are people on a beach, possibly they played volleyball, they're sunbathing, nice clear water, it's sunny, tropical weather, it's probably hot, probably humid, there are palm trees, there are possibly coconuts, there might be a hotel behind here. You may have suggested lots of tourists in the area because a cruise ship carries lots of people. You can see a resort in the background which probably has restaurants and a pier over here. Typical tourist scene. 2. List any reasons you can think of that Jamaica would want tourism. So some ideas of what you may have put. People pay for resorts, which gives money. Cruise ships bring money and people when they come and dock at a port in a country, which again is helpful. People buy food, people buy coconuts, people go scuba diving, people play sports on the beach, people sunbathe on the beach. All these things might bring money. All of that money might be used to help a country develop, like Jamaica. Fantastic. Using the photo alone, think of any negative effects of tourism in Jamaica, number 3. Well, some ideas you could have put. First one, massive cruise ship brings air pollution. Also, cruise ships often release oil and waste into the sea, which might cause water pollution, which might spread diseases. It also might damage the biodiversity, which means the plants and animals in the sea. You may have also said that the people are staying in a resort and they're not really mingling with the rest of the community, so maybe they're not spending money in the community. You may have also said that the people on the ground might be littering. There are many possible negative effects and many possible positive effects. Please, after this lesson, watch this link which I attach underneath the video and be prepared to learn about tourism in Jamaica. So the key question that you will be asked in the exam is this. To what extent can tourism promote economic development in a NEE? And when this question comes up in the exam, I want you to think about Jamaica. So through a series of examples, I'm going to explain to you what tourism is like in Jamaica, whether it's actually good for the country, and how it's actually causing problems or holding Jamaica's development back, and what people in Jamaica, especially the government, might do better to make tourism actually help the people of Jamaica more. So the first question, since this is a geography lesson, is to ask ourselves, where is Jamaica? I'm going to show you two maps, and I'm going to give you a gap fill. There are some words that go in the gaps. Please take a moment to try and write out the paragraph and fill in the gaps, and then I will go through the answers. Here are the two maps. Here are your words. And here's your paragraph. So write the whole paragraph with the words in the gaps. Go. So you should have put, Jamaica is an island in the Caribbean Sea. It is located west of the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean is here. Jamaica's here. It's an island in the Caribbean Sea. It is approximately 17 degrees latitude north of the equator. The equator goes around here. Jamaica is 17 degrees north, which means it's in the northern hemisphere. It is south of the USA, which is here. Florida's here. It is also south of the Tropic of Cancer and has a hot, wet, tropical climate. Please mark your answers. So basic geography, where is Jamaica? Now you know. It is the fourth largest island in the Caribbean as well, and it's a really popular tourist destination. Jamaica may be a very small island, but even within this small island there are lots of differences and important features that I want you to know about. It will help you understand what life is like there. It's more than just Bob Marley and Usain Bolt, I promise you. Here we go. Subtitle, what are the key features of Jamaica? So this is a map of Jamaica, and it shows the different terrain and relief of Jamaica. So dark green means mountains, and light green means flat land, lowland next to the sea. So around here you have lowland, the beaches, and in the centre you have the mountains. I'd like you to write the following notes around a map, possibly, or in your books at the very least. Tourism is very popular in Jamaica, but tourists do not go everywhere in the country. There are some places that are extremely popular and some places where tourists hardly ever visit. Let me show you. If you were to fly out from Heathrow or Gatwick to Jamaica, you would most certainly land in this place. This is Kingston, the capital city of Jamaica. It has a population of more than 1.2 million people, which is about the same size as Birmingham in England. It's got most of Jamaica's big businesses, people working in the tertiary sector, office jobs, and some of the richest people in Jamaica live in big houses here. Kingston is the capital city and has the main airport. That's where you'd land. But most likely, if you were going to Jamaica, you'd take a bus or another plane from Kingston to another one of the parts of the country. This is the most popular tourist town in all of Jamaica. It's called Montego Bay. It's also one of the richest places in Jamaica. Some of the largest hotels sit here, and some really cool hotels that sit on stilts stretch out over to the sea. Montego Bay, if you were going to go on holiday in Jamaica, you would very likely end up here. Also, off of Montego Bay, there's great scuba diving, which you may love to do. You can see a whole variety of fish that you would never see near England. Inland of Montego Bay is the biggest inland city called Mandeville. This is an important town because it shows what life is like and how different it is in a city without as much tourism. Mandeville receives very few tourists, especially compared to Montego Bay. The GDP per capita in Mandeville is 20% lower than the GDP per capita in Montego Bay. You're going to find out why. See if you can think about it already. This is another extremely popular tourist location, especially if you want to go cave diving in Jamaica, or you want to go surfing or to check out the coral reefs. It's called Ocho Rios, which in English means 8 rivers. 8 rivers in Jamaica meet here, and they end up in this town called Ocho Rios, where you have some of the biggest hotels and resorts where people stay. It's really one of the most luxury places you can go on holiday in Jamaica. Right inland of Ocho Rios is the most popular natural landmark inland away from the coast, which is called Dunn's River Falls, possibly the most beautiful waterfall in the country. There are many waterfalls, all of them very popular, but Dunn's River Falls is one of the biggest and attracts more than 1 million visitors every year. It's extremely popular, and I'm sure you can see why by looking at this photo. It's just gorgeous. Finally, for this brief explanation, we go to the very far east of the country to another famous landmark called the Blue Mountain National Park. They're not actually blue, but they are the highest points in Jamaica. The highest peak in Jamaica is called Blue Mountain Peak here. It's the highest mountain. And this is the home of ecotourism in Jamaica. People go and stay in little hostels and little lodges in the mountains, and they sleep in hammocks, and they sleep underneath mosquito nets, and they don't have a big hotel. And it's a very different tourist experience to Ojo Rios or Montego Bay. Possibly what makes Blue Mountain the most famous, though, is something that Jamaica exports every year, which is coffee. Blue Mountain coffee, grown in the hills of the Blue Mountain National Park, is extremely expensive and prized for its exceptional flavour. I myself have tried it a couple of times. It is delicious. Possibly not worth the price, but it's great. This is a basic overview of Jamaica's geography. There are rich parts with lots of tourism. The capital city, Kingston, is also wealthy. There are poorer parts like Mandeville with much less tourism. And tourists engage in ecotourism, which doesn't damage the environment and gives locals jobs, in Blue Mountain National Park. The Jamaican GDP, so all the money made in Jamaica every year, 30% of it comes from tourism every year. That's more than $2 billion worth of income from tourism every year is made in Jamaica from tourism. Which brings us to our big question. If tourism is building these huge hotels and exploring these forests and having people visit and land in the capital city, is it actually helping Jamaica to develop? Well, the first question I'm going to show you is whether it's actually improving the country, and the second question are ways that it's actually holding the country back, or problems with tourism. This is a really important debate, and it's being had in many countries around the world, not just Jamaica. So, first question. How can tourism help countries like Jamaica develop? Write this as a subtitle. There are 4 main ways that tourism helps Jamaica to develop. I want you to imagine you've just left school in Jamaica and you have a basic education, you can read and write, your literacy is good, and you're thinking of getting a job. In Jamaica, your greatest chance of getting a job is in tourism, especially if you speak English. The first big benefit of tourism for Jamaica is employment. People work as tour guides all around the country, showing tourists around the country its various landmarks and sites. This boat is driving through one of the rivers in Jamaica, and this expert tour guide, who makes an income that's higher than the average in Jamaica, is an example of someone who's gained employment from tourism. More than 290,000 people in Jamaica have jobs in tourism. These could be tour guides, or restaurant workers, or chefs in hotels. They could be cleaners in hotels or hotel managers. They could be people who are taking tourists on scuba trips, or people who are working at customer services. All kinds of jobs come from tourism, and it's a total of about 290,000 jobs in tourism in Jamaica. That's more than 10% of all jobs. So first benefit of tourism is it gives people jobs, and often higher paid jobs than they would have without it. Second thing, so you want to attract people to your country. You want people to look in a magazine or in a brochure and think, I really want to go to that country. You have to make it look attractive. Imagine you're going on holiday to Jamaica. What kinds of things as a teenager would you want? Well, you'd probably want good roads so that when you drive to the beach or you drive to your hotel, you don't get banged around by potholes, or you don't have an accident in a car. You probably want the internet and air conditioning. You probably want clean water so that when you turn the tap on, wash your face, you don't get a disease. You probably want sewage so that when you flush the toilet in the hotel, it works. All of these basic things you would want as a tourist, and so Jamaica invests in it. The second big benefit of tourism is that it forces the country to invest in infrastructure. This is Montego Bay, which has some of Jamaica's biggest infrastructural investments. The roads are good, there's electricity supplies, there's good internet, clean water, Almost everyone has access to clean water, internet, and electricity. And that's as a result of the Jamaican desire to attract tourists. They have to make it ready for them, so they want to go there. So second benefit of tourism is it encourages investment in the country. Third benefit. I want you to imagine that you are a farmer in Jamaica and you grow perhaps some crops. You also have some livestock, some cows, and you're working out where you're going to sell these products that you've grown or you've made. You can sell them in a farm, in a market, or you could sell them to a hotel. Here's what happens. Jamaican hotels, big tourist resort hotels, have restaurants, and those restaurants need food. Some of the food will come from local farmers. Those farmers will get an income, a higher income than they would if they sold their food at the market. As a result of that higher income, they now have more money to spend on better equipment for their farm, which could lead to better crop yields. They could also spend that money on their kids' education so that their kids could get tertiary jobs, better paid jobs. Finally, a higher income for farmers means more taxes for the government, which means the government can invest more. This is called the multiplier effect. The presence of hotels means that farmers get better jobs, means their kids get better jobs, means the government gets more taxes. That's the multiplier effect. One economic activity, a hotel, leads to many other economic activities. This gentleman here is working as an accountant. He's also a customer service agent who works helping people out in hotels if they need questions about how to get around the country. He also deals with the money that goes through the hotels. His job was created as a result of this hotel arriving. The multiplier effect is the third benefit of tourism. Finally, Jamaican tourism can encourage people around the world to be aware of its environment and the need to protect it. Jamaica has some very rare species of birds and wildlife that needs to be protected. And using tourism, people can be more aware of it and therefore want to protect it through ecotourism. In Jamaica's Blue Mountain National Park, many hundreds of people stay in small lodges that do not damage the environment, that recycle, that use solar power. And this is called ecotourism. And it educates people about the need to protect the environment so that they pollute less and so that they protect the Jamaican biodiversity, the plants and animals in the country. So tourism can also encourage protection of the environment. Finally, ecotourism is really powerful for helping Jamaica develop because it employs local people. This is important because the local people get jobs, they get paid, and they use their expertise to guide tourists around the area, to tell them about the different birds and wildlife. This is much better than tourism that hires people from other countries, because then they just send the money back to their home country and the taxes don't go to the Jamaican government. So hiring local people in tourism through ecotourism is another benefit. So in these 4 ways, tourism can help a country develop. However, tourism in Jamaica is not perfect, and it's doing some things wrong that are holding Jamaican development back. Let me show them to you now. Subtitle, please. What are the problems with tourism for development? Picture London. It's got the London Eye. It has huge, very impressive bridges. It has skyscrapers. It has super fast internet. You've got clean water everywhere, electricity everywhere. You have the best jobs there. Some of the most impressive architecture, the best transport, all of the best buses, the underground. Most of the investment in the UK goes into big cities because that's where most of the people are. And London gets the most investment of all, partly because it has lots of tourists. The same is true in Jamaica. Think about this. Think about a village that you may have been to or seen. Were there any skyscrapers there? What were the buses like compared to those in London? What was the internet speed like compared to that in London? To all of those questions, you would say probably worse in the village than in the city. And the same thing is true in London. And this causes inequality. In Jamaica, in the places that have less tourism, there is less investment by the government in people's quality of life. People's houses are often of very poor quality. especially when they don't have jobs in tourism, so they don't have the money to get a better house. They lack clean water, and they lack sewage, and they lack electricity, which means the children can't study after night. It means that they often have to walk far to go to the toilet, which is dangerous. It means that the roads are often of poor quality, which means that car accidents happen very often and people die unnecessarily. Inequality is a big problem in Jamaica because the government mostly invests in areas with tourists. But as I told you about that city, Mandeville, there are places with many people with fewer tourists. They do not benefit as much. So the first big problem with tourism is that it encourages inequality between the areas that have the tourists and the areas that don't. Second big problem. You have a massive cruise ship that turns up outside your city. You see it coming over the horizon, the smoke streaming up above its chimney. Thousands of tourists get off and they pile into resorts, hotels. They lie on the beach and they chuck their Coke bottles out and the wind blows it into the sea. The hotel produces so much food and so much food waste that some of it doesn't get recycled, so it gets thrown out into big piles of waste, which some of it goes into the sea, some of it goes into rivers, some of it goes into the ground. This causes many problems, and it's an example of environmental damage. Tourism, if countries are not careful, can damage the environment. This is an example of an area of land outside a big hotel in Jamaica. Environmental damage can involve water pollution, where ships release oil into the sea, or where litter goes into the sea. It can involve the fact that in Jamaica there isn't very much recycling. So when people throw out their waste, it often gets built up into big piles, like this. Tourism is responsible for this because there are simply too many people sometimes for the government to be able to handle, for the recycling lorries to be able to handle. When people use toilets in big hotels, often the sewage systems in Jamaica can't handle it. So some of the sewage goes straight into the rivers, or onto the land, or into the sea, which means there are harmful chemicals being released, which can damage wildlife but also spread diseases. Finally, when people travel around Jamaica, they travel in buses or cars, which means there's more air pollution. This can cause problems like asthma and health problems, but also it can lead to global warming as more carbon dioxide is released. So environmental damage is another problem with tourism. The third problem with tourism in Jamaica especially is a particularly big problem, and here it is. Most people in Jamaica work in tourism. More people work in tourism than in any other sector or type of job in Jamaica, which means that if for some reason tourism disappears for a short time, then people lose their jobs, leading to massive unemployment and a loss of income. Jamaica happens to be located just south of the USA, and it is directly in the path of hurricanes between August and October every year. This is a problem because between August and October every year, when hurricanes hit Jamaica, tourists stop visiting. As a result, unemployment grows rapidly and many people lose their jobs. This happens because Jamaica depends on tourism for its economy, for making money. So every August to October, every year, Jamaican people lose their incomes. And as a result, they're less able to spend money improving their quality of life. And this is a big problem for Jamaican development. If Jamaica wants to benefit more from tourism, it needs to invest in other sectors, like manufacturing, like research, like universities, like the service sector outside of tourism. That way, when jobs in tourism are lost, people will still have their jobs because not many of them will rely on tourism. So the third big problem with tourism in Jamaica is that because so many people do it, when the jobs disappear because of a hurricane, it leads to unemployment. This is called economic dependence. The opposite of economic dependence is economic diversification. It's a big phrase, but it means when a country has jobs in many different activities. For example, in Britain, we have jobs in tourism, but also in the BBC, in construction for building houses, as teachers, as doctors, as nurses, as bankers, as football players and sportsmen, as horticulturalists arranging flowers and working in national parks, as refuse collection people, bin men, all kinds of people in all kinds of jobs in Britain. Very few people in Britain work in tourism, which means that if the tourism in Britain were to suddenly stop, most people would still have their jobs. Whereas in Jamaica, that's not the case, because it has economic dependence on tourism. But the final problem with tourism is perhaps the biggest. I want you to picture your typical holiday. You go to a beautiful resort with 5 stars. It's got a huge white building, white hotel building, white sandy beach, sunbeds, lovely swimming pool. You get food whenever you want. You can drink Cokes for as long as you want. There's a huge bed with air conditioning. You never want to leave your hotel. And so you spend all your money in your hotel. When you buy the ticket to Jamaica or on holiday, you pay for that hotel, and that's where you spend almost all of your time. This is a problem because in Jamaica, almost all of the hotels are owned by foreign companies, by companies that come from other HICs, mainly the USA. This means that when tourists spend money on hotels in Jamaica, very little of the money actually goes to the Jamaican government to invest in development. Most of the money that tourists spend go to the tourist companies and therefore back to the HICs. This does not benefit Jamaica, and it is called economic leakage. For instance, your average tourist in Jamaica will spend almost all of their time in a hotel and will not leave, partly because they think it's dangerous outside because crime is quite high, but also because it's just so enjoyable and relaxing to be in the hotel and to scuba dive and to lie on the beach that why would you leave? So the final way to help tourism become more beneficial for development in Jamaica is to invest in your own tourist companies as a country. More importantly, to invest in other areas of the country to attract tourists to go out of their hotels. For example, to go to Blue Mountain National Park as ecotourists, to explore the cities and spend money in the restaurants, to hire local tour guides to take you on trips around the country. These things will give money to the local people rather than to the foreign companies which send their money back to the HIC. For these 4 reasons, inequality, environmental damage, economic dependence, and economic leakage, tourism is not perfect for development in any ease. I've shown you the example of Jamaica, but this is true in almost every country. It is especially true in NEEs and LICs. That is why tourism alone will not help a country become an HIC. It needs to solve these 4 problems in order for it to help a country develop more quickly. The average income of people in Jamaica is $10,000, which is much lower than it would be if the money from tourism stayed in the country and the taxes were given to the government and it invested in people's education and in industries. Because so many people do not benefit from tourism and from investment in Jamaica, about 17% of people in the country live in very bad poverty, which means they live on less than $2 every day. This is completely different to the picture that we see of rich tourist areas when you go on holiday in Jamaica. So remember that for tourism to help a country to develop, a government needs to invest everywhere. A government needs to encourage tourists to spend money in the local economy, not in just their hotels. A government needs to invest in other sectors, not just the tourist sector. And finally, a government needs to make sure that ecotourism is encouraged, and it needs to invest in things like recycling and sewage so that there's no environmental damage. Let's see how much you remember. I've explained a lot in a short amount of time. Please write 1 to 21 in your books. Read the paragraphs, put the words in the gaps, and then mark your answers after. Here we go. So, Jamaica is the 4th largest island located in the Caribbean Sea. It has a tropical climate, which means it is hot and humid all year. Jamaica is classed as an NEE because it has growing secondary and tertiary sectors, especially tourism. Its average income is about $10,000, which is typical for a NEE. About 17% of people live in poverty in Jamaica on less than $2 a day. The capital city is Kingston, and the main tourist towns are Montego Bay and Ocho Rios. An important town with fewer tourists is Mandeville, located in central Jamaica. This town has a GDP per capita about 20% lower than Montego Bay. Tourism provides about 30% of Jamaica's GDP, mostly from big hotels, cruises, and guided tours. One way that tourism has helped Jamaica develop is through the multiplier effect. For example, the hotels have restaurants that source their food from local farmers, who gain a higher income, which creates taxes but is also invested in education and equipment. Tourism creates about 290,000 jobs in Jamaica, both directly from working in hotels and as guides, but also indirectly, for example, as taxi drivers and engineers. A significant challenge on relying on tourism for development in Jamaica is created by its climate. Between August and October every year, hurricanes halt tourism and cause unemployment, which lowers people's incomes. Jamaica needs to diversify into other industries to prevent this. Finally, the fact that the government invests mostly in tourist areas and the shortage of jobs in other sectors creates inequality in Jamaica that contributes to high crime. Please give yourselves a mark out of 21, correct any mistakes, watch the video again, and make sure you watch the Jamaica tour video earlier on, which I've linked below. Time to practice and answer questions about this in your own words so that you really understand it. 2 questions. Please write your answers and then mark them after. Go. So number 1, explain how tourism can create an economic multiplier effect. So you could have said, the multiplier effect happens when one economic activity indirectly creates others. That's an important sentence for a mark. For example, jobs in tourism indirectly create jobs in other sectors, e.g. hotels use taxis and restaurants source food from farmers, a mark. If you used a different example, you can still get a mark, as long as it's correct. 2, explain one negative environmental impact of tourism in a NEE. Any of these points would have got you 2 marks. Footpath erosion in Blue Mountains in Jamaica from too many tourists walking not on the paths, causing damage. Overcrowded beaches, resorts and national parks can lead to littering. Shortage of recycling creates urban waste from hotels, which can pollute the water supply. Also, more air pollution from vehicles can damage ecosystems and also human health. Give yourselves a mark out of 4. Add any corrections or missing information. Okay, really important. Think back to any of the facts you learned this lesson, especially about the advantages and disadvantages of tourism. Write 2 questions, answer them, and then test yourselves on them. Thank you so much for joining me. From next lesson onwards, we will be focusing on a case study of economic development in a NEE. And the case study will be a country in West Africa called Nigeria. I'm going to show you how Nigeria is trying to develop and what challenges it faces to its development and how it can overcome them. Join me then. Thank you.